Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and it is nice to have you with us this morning. We start with the newspaper headlines, and of course we start with those from Kenya. The Star newspaper, the main headline, Raila, troops reject a Ruto law change bid. They cite the possibility of Ruto testing waters for a life presidency proposal. That story is on page 4 and 5. Police forced their way into Matiang'i's home after raid claim. And brilliant girl crashing stones after failing to join high school. A story is on page 22. How Ruto agent social media account hacked, says Israel. That story is on page 6. And monkeypox vaccine found to be effective. Test set for July. Very well. The Daily Nation. Police raid Matiang'i city home amid row over search warrant. Police raided former Interior Minister Fred Matiang'i's home in Karen yesterday, saying they had a search order to retrieve CCTV footage in the ongoing investigation into an alleged raid a week ago. His lawyer said the officers broke the main gate, forcibly gained entry into the house and ransacked the rooms. The story is on page 10. How Israeli hackers meddled in elections. A group of Israeli disinformation contractors hacked into email and social media accounts of senior election officials and President William Ruto's close allies just days before the 2022 polls. An investigative report has revealed, however, both the Kenya Kwanza and Azimio camps have denied hiring any foreigners. The story is on page 2. And cough syrup from snail slime on the way. Kenyan researchers banned midnight oil. I don't know how I feel about that, but hey. Raila's purge on Azimio rebels. That story is on page 4. Mystery of woman's death after shooting in the neck. That story is on page 6. And 5 home styling rules you should never, ever break. That is on the special pull-out of the property. Pull-out today on the Daily Nation. The Standard newspaper revealed how Israeli hackers hit Ruto's team. Israeli hackers accessed emails and private chats of 2 of President Ruto's advisors before and after last August presidential election, posing as the aides and sending texts to unsuspecting targets as part of an intelligence gathering and disinformation campaign. An investigation now shows. That story is on page 4. Raila cracks the whip on Azimio rebel legislators. Page 5. And shocking killing in city center. And KRA misses tax target by 43 billion Kenya shillings. That's not very good there for President Ruto. And police storm Matiang'i city home. You'll find that on page 6. Lawyer wants limits on land ownership. Man wants the High Court to compel Parliament to enact a law spelling out the minimum and maximum acreage of land that an individual can own. Okay, that's quite something there. I'd like to see Parliament debate that and come up with that law. They can't, because they're the same people. They're the same people. Right now they are in power. And, they always look out for themselves, Kenyan politicians. So I'd like to see how that will happen there. I'll be looking forward for that debate. Okay. And then some other newspapers. First Lady from New Vision from Uganda. First Lady warns against homosexuality. Uganda is really obsessed with this thing. Anyway. Public varsities to get 150 billion Uganda shillings for facelift. And then the life and times of Janani Lewum. The Daily Monitor, woman appeals against fine for refusing to marry. I guess if you refuse to marry, you have to pay back, I don't know, the dowry, or, you're fined. Okay, the Daily News from Zimbabwe. Government set to auction Mary's South Africa assets as she continues to suffer one setback after another, and then another major coup for 3K TV. And then the Newsday also from Zimbabwe, suspect spending 3 years in pre-trial custody. The Daily Trust from Nigeria, federal government states consider out-of-court settlement. The Punch as well from Nigeria, violence spreads in states, 3 killed, banks banned, a violent protest rock Delta, Edo, Ondo, Oyo, Kwara and Benue State. Supreme Court maintains anti-deadline order. 7 states join legal battle. And then The Nation, out-of-court settlement talks on Naira crisis collapse. The New Times, this one is from Rwanda. What next after NEC proposes a new schedule for next legislative polls? If elections are harmonized, Rwanda would save nearly 6 billion Rwanda's francs. So I guess the National Electoral Commission in Rwanda is proposing that legislative polls and I guess presidential polls be held at the same time. That's how we do it here. And there have been conversations about, can we separate this different elections so that the presidential election happens by itself and the other elections. But I don't know, that will be expensive on one hand. On the other hand, it's usually very chaotic. But I think for Rwanda, they've been doing it separately. So now there is a proposal by the Electoral Commission to do all elections on the same day to save on resources. That is the argument behind that new proposal. The Citizen from Tanzania, why you could pay less for data soon. The government yesterday outlined a comprehensive plan to cut data tariffs and other telecommunication charges later this year, when the process of reviewing tax-related legislation for the industry will be completed. The story is on page 2, no end to tourism musical chairs. Okay, so that is what we have from Africa. Then we look at some other newspapers from the UK. The Guardian, Sturgeon quits citing brutality in politics. The Daily Mail, now police say missing Nicola had significant alcohol issues. And then tearful Sturgeon quits with her dreams in tatters. Scotland's First Minister in shock resignation. Independence bid in chaos and gender ID law sunk. Now questions over husband and SNP finances. Okay, the Daily Express, also from the UK, high-risk Nicola had issues with alcohol. And then in the future of our nation, is the future of our union safer now? Sturgeon has gone. That is what we have there. And the Independent exit tearful Nicola. So is it also brutal end of Scottish independence? And missing dog walker had significant issues with alcohol brought on by struggles with menopause, says police. Is menopause that brutal? Now I'm scared. Okay. What? The Metro. Changing of the old guard. Stagon. Cobind. All right, that's what we have there. The Daily Telegraph. Sturgeon brought down by trans row. I was watching an interview she was doing, and of course, this new, craze with the, support of the LGBTQ and the debate around who is a woman and what is a woman. And I think questions were posed to her, and she was asked who is a woman, and she couldn't even answer that. She fumbled. She couldn't even answer that. So it's a very interesting debate that has been happening over there in the UK, in Europe, and also in the US. And it's quite interesting. And there's another proposal I was seeing the other day that there are there are suggestions that the world should stop referring to God as He, so that He becomes. God is not assigned to a particular gender, so He becomes gender neutral. So if you want to pray, you don't say Our Father in Heaven. I don't know what you say, I've forgotten, but somebody somewhere will remind me what you're supposed to say. Oh, Our Parent in Heaven. I'm telling you, it's quite interesting debates there. But anyway, let us look at the weather this morning. From across some cities in Africa. Cape Town, 21 degrees Celsius. Those are the temperatures today. In Dakar, 18 degrees Celsius. And in Khartoum, 15 degrees Celsius. A bit sunny there. And some episodes of a bit of clouds expected there. Tripoli, 9 degrees Celsius. It's a cold day there. Addis Ababa, 16 degrees Celsius, and of course in Nairobi it's 22, just like yesterday, 22 degrees Celsius. It's sunny all day, the weather is beautiful, it's quite lovely here. So if you're looking for a place to travel and just go enjoy good weather, Nairobi will be the place you want to be at. It's quite a lovely weather. And Alexandria in Egypt, 13 degrees Celsius, a bit of sunshine, and also some clouds expected and some later on in the day. Kinshasa, 24 degrees, a bit cold with some clouds expected there. So there you go. That's what we have. So let me just bring us a rundown of some sports news this morning and see what's really happening across the sporting world. Let me see what I can get. All right, I'm looking at how the Kenyan newspapers have covered what they have in their sports pages this morning. On the Star newspaper, Lioness dream big, and KRU will comply with SDT ruling on last year's polls, says Gangla, that is the Kenya Rugby Union chairperson Odur Gangla, said they will comply with the Sports Dispute Tribunal ruling which nullified last September's elections, I think in the Kenya RFU, Kenya Rugby Union there. And then cash-strapped Lakers lure sponsors with masterstroke at ACC tournament. It is not the Lakers that we know from the LA Lakers. This is another Lakers we have here. Lakers women's hockey team here in Kenya, not the LA Lakers. Nigel's man lifeline. Why Coleman's winner against PSG is life-saving for Bayern manager. And the youngsters skip give Tottenham hope despite defeat in Milan. Ronaldo tried to stop me from leaving, says Abubakar. Cameroonian captain Vincent Abubakar has said Cristiano Ronaldo tried to talk him out of leaving Al Nassr following the Portuguese star's arrival at the Saudi club. The 31-year-old, who had 6 months left on his Al Nassr contract, was fully aware that a foreign player would have to be sacrificed for the 5-time Ballon d'Or winner, despite the former Man United and Real Madrid star attempt to stop him from leaving. Abubakar opted to return to Turkish side Besiktas by signing a 2.5 years deal in January. So, okay, so that is what we have there. Let me see what we have in on the Daily Nation, also on their sport page. Beaten PSG left looking to Mbappe to keep title hopes alive. He did not play yesterday when we were looking at the same story. I think he has an injury of some sort, so it was hoped that he was feeling much better, but I guess not good enough for him to play yesterday. So, and then 15 goals, 2 hat-tricks and counting. Omala on a roll. Red hot Kogalo striker, not done yet, and wants to score in every game this season. And then after training hard, it's now time to win easy for Kenya. And also the other, was it on Monday, I was talking to you about the Kenyan team, athletics team that went to Australia. Now, some interesting story here on the Daily Nation. Ugali forces itself into Kenyan menu. Australian hosts are very considerate, like Kim Bradbury of Mantra Hotel, where Team Kenya is staying. She observed with concern the high amount of food left over by athletes, but noticed the tray with boiled yellow maize was being cleared in minutes. She asked team coordinator John Kimeto if her menu was the problem. Yes, she was told. So she quickly served the net for popular Kenyan cuisine before confronting Kimeto with a checklist of githeri, greens and kachumbari that her chef would easily prepare. But not ugali, however. Team accountant Emmanuel Kimeto took up the ugali making task. He safeguards our money, but he is not busy right now and is strong enough to cook ugali, assured Kimeto. Kim was happy with the deal. So, okay. So Kenyans, the Kenyan team, they were being served. I don't know if they were served caviar and these other foods from the West, and they were just leaving that on the plates. So the owner of the restaurant got worried. Why are they not eating? And yet they're supposed to eat well so that they're able to perform well, Team Kenya. And then she checked with the officials in the Team Kenya, and she was told, yeah, there's a probability your menu is a problem. So they Googled and voila, so that's how ugali had to be cooked for Team Kenya. Isn't that something now? Okay, so that is that with the sports. All right, so thank you so much. You are now up to date. Now let's look at some stories that I would like for us to talk about this morning, about a survey that paints a bleak picture of Ethiopia's state of mind after 2 years of war. Now, as Ethiopians emerge from 2 years of conflict, a new Gallup survey paints a bleak picture of people suffering economically and emotionally. The survey conducted in the fall of 2022 found that a record high 65% of Ethiopians are struggling to afford food, with food prices rising to 43% in 2022 compared to 2021, and certain staple items soaring by more than 80%. Opinion researchers had not been able to enter the country in 2021 and saw a significant change when they returned the following year. Zach Bikers, a regional director, Africa at Gallup, said the team interviewed about 1,000 people but were not able to travel to the conflict areas. In addition to the conflict, the country is facing its worst drought in 40 years, putting additional pressure on the food supply, the report said. At the same time, income is also under pressure, with 45% of Ethiopians finding it very difficult to get by on their present household income compared to 28% in 2019. Baika said he is seeing similar results across the region, and is quoted as saying, really East Africa in general is facing this drought, but also the fallout from the Ukraine-Russia conflict. He said many of the countries in these regions are big importers of wheat, Ethiopia included, and fertilizers. So really the global pressure on food supply and prices, I think, are happening in a major impact. The situation has had a profound effect on Ethiopians' mental and emotional well-being. When asked to rate their quality of life from 1 to 10, the average rating dropped from 4.5 in 2020 to 3.6 in 2022, the lowest since 2012. The survey also found significant increases in people reporting they feel worry, physical pain, anger, and stress. Now, we asked about physical issues, food and infrastructure, but there's kind of an emotional component too, and how people are feeling themselves in terms of happiness or negative emotions. Baika said, I think that's another important thing to keep an eye. Now, the country faces a monumental task in maintaining peace, restarting the economy, and reconciliation in the wake of the conflict, but there has been some positive news. The report noted the cessation of hostilities has allowed greater access to humanitarian relief, and the national government has attempted to normalize relations with the international community, including the attendance of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed at the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit in Washington in December. The war between Ethiopia's federal government with the Tigrayan forces may have ended, but the impact on the country has been profound. The DC-based global opinion polling company found researchers still haven't been able to access the Tigray region and some of the surrounding areas. And this person said that I believe it was about 7% of the population we were able to talk to, he said, adding that although the team followed protocols, they are kind of at the mercy of the circumstances. Sometimes. Okay, so when he says circumstances, sometimes that means there's a lot of surveillance. It's like China, China foreign media, you just can't go in there and do whatever. I see this international media walk around Kenya freely, collect their news, and as it should, and do all that without anyone bothering with them, as long as they're not breaking any laws. And so that is not the case. If you're a foreign media and you go to China or other places that are highly guarded, you will have a government official follow you through. And in Ethiopia, that has been the case since the outbreak of this war in 2020 in November. So, and that's why this survey, this report, said they were just able to interview about 7% of the population. And so I don't know if we can, but usually surveys is based on a smaller sample of, whatever it is that they want to find out. So maybe let's just look at this survey and what they're saying. But for me, what stood out for me is the impact they're saying and the state of mind after, these 2 years of war. And I keep saying, when I look at the xenophobia that keeps happening in South Africa and how South Africans act, not all of them, a few number of them, I feel like these are traumas from many, many years, of growing in a system where you had to constantly prove your existence, where you had to constantly prove that you belong there, knowing well and good that indeed that is your country and that's where you belonged, and having to prove that you deserve to go to good schools, to have access to good schools, to have access to basic rights and all that, because the segregation, the apartheid, meant that Africans are not even allowed to access even quality education. When you look at the African schools, the kind of even learning materials they were having is quite different from the elite schools or the white privileged schools. They're quite different. So for the African schools, the learning materials are quite basic, just learn enough to know how to spell your name and just to add a few of your rands, and that's it. So it was a struggle, and you can see it's a constant struggle. And I feel like the Black South Africans, the ones that feel disenfranchised, they have not really, I think the trauma is still very evident. The trauma is still very evident, and they're still stuck in that. So I don't know if you need a mass counseling or a mass therapy for these people, because I've always thought when you look at how this, xenophobia happens, you realize this anger that is misdirected to the wrong people. Because if you look down the history, you'll realize that a lot of African countries actually worked to support the ANC and other movements in fighting against apartheid. So Africa countries were very instrumental in granting South Africa its independence, the kind of support they offered. A lot of South Africans traveled to East Africa and they were given IDs, they were given passports, they were given the support they needed when they were fighting to have their country back and to have equality and to remove apartheid. So they're still traumatized. They're still from what I see and from how and the rate of crimes and the rate of all this, I know, times are hard, and even here sometimes I feel like, there are areas I may not walk very comfortably because of some safety issues, but that is spread across. But South Africa, there are places that are known to be the most unsafest towns and cities in the world, because the rates of crimes are really, really high. And because this is a people that were left disfranchised, the young men and women. And so they'd rather just wake up and I don't know do what. And then there are no opportunities. And the inequalities are usually so wide. If you find those who are rich, they're really, really rich. And we still have estates in South Africa where blacks are not even allowed to live there, even till today. And for the poor, they're really, really poor. So there's no, the middle here, there's not so many people as such. And the inequalities and the disparities are quite large. But back to Ethiopia, I was just trying to draw parallel with the trauma that perhaps the Black South Africans suffered during apartheid and how they've not been able to fully move on to now this conflict that engulfed Ethiopia for 2 years. So this survey has found out that there is among other things that is happening, and among other issues, and of course inflation is not just an Ethiopian thing. Economies were battered during the time of COVID. So this survey was done during COVID. So I would understand the inflation and people are struggling to feed. And now on top of that, add that conflict that had crops destroyed. They did not get to harvest. The people from Tigray, we saw their crops being destroyed and all that, and they were uprooted from their homes because they had to run out for their lives and all that, and they wasted a whole 2 years without engaging in meaningful economic activities, including farming. And things like that. So that really affected them so much. So I understand the COVID part, but I also understand the trauma that, also this conflict added to already the world that was struggling with COVID. So the food prices there, the inflation is at 43%, have rose by 43%. That's a lot. But my concern is the mental state. And I'm concerned about the mental state. If we were to go by this survey and what it is saying, is that people have been left more fearful. Ethiopians have been left more scared. And there is some level of uncertainty among the people who went through this war, who were at the core of what was happening there. So they're saying a lot of them are feeling worried, they're having physical pain, and they're angered and they're stressed. Now, these are very dangerous emotions if they're not well managed and they're not well addressed. So this will traumatize this generation. And this is trauma that will be passed on to their children, to their children's children. I was saying here the other day, as much as we're looking at the mediation process, which I think has gone on quite well, and we're seeing some good progress being made, but if the issue of accountability is not fully addressed in a manner that perhaps will bring closure, you might not get your family back for those who were murdered. You might not get reparations for the losses that you suffered. But there is something about feeling as though justice has been served. You feel like, as much as I suffered, but also I feel like justice has been served. So you're able to sort of move on, even with the loss. You're able to feel like, there's something has been done about that. And so people are able to actually pick up and move on and heal and move on. But if you have, and I know it's too early into the conversation to think about accountability and to think about healing, but if Ethiopia was to truly heal and reconcile with itself, then Ethiopia must be willing to have very difficult conversation. From the reports we are getting, so others are quoting 600,000 people died. Isaias Afwerki, for heaven's sakes, the other day he was having an interview, I was talking to you about it here yesterday in the local media in Eritrea. He said, yes, a lot of people died. So people have died. People went through great losses. These are not things you sweep under the rags. These are things you set up mechanism by which you get to address these issues and you get to look at the aspect of accountability. Because if you don't, and we see there's a significant increase in people reporting they feel worried, they feel physical pain from the trauma. Sometimes that's what it does to you. I'm not a doctor, but that's what I've heard. And you feel anger, they feel angered, and they're stressed out. And these are things that are the emotional components that people must be addressed. This trauma must be addressed, that the people of Tigray and other areas also who were affected, because like I've said here before, both sides have been accused. The government side and also the TPLF side has been accused of also inflicting pain and suffering and all these things, towards other communities that perhaps are not in agreement with what they were doing. And so this is something that the country of Ethiopia, if Ethiopia wants to truly move forward and build one cohesive community of Ethiopians, then they must have the difficult conversations. They must address these difficult things so that the country can fully move on. Kenya, we are suffering today because of the historic traumas and historic injustices that maybe a section of the communities are feeling had been done many years back before this administration, before the administration after that, before Mwai Kibaki's administration, even before others started, before even Moi's administrations. Years back, things that happened, historical injustices that took place, that were never addressed. So you find that the people who were present when these things were happening told these stories to their children. So our generation right now, we were not there during those days, but you find that there are people who are holding on to these grudges. There are people who are holding on to these injustices, even though they are not present when this when this was happening, but because of the stories that were passed on them and to them, they're still carrying on this trauma. And of course, other things that has happened in the recent past, even the post-election violence, that some Kenyans are still yet to heal and move on from. And we see that every time we have elections, there's a trigger to that. And these people are triggered in ways that you could even never imagine. So there has to be a mechanism to really find a way for Ethiopia to truly heal, for Ethiopia to truly move on, and for Ethiopia to truly address these issues that are now brought them to where they were. I was just reading another story just a while ago, and I saw that the Orthodox Church has sort of worked out its differences, but that is a story I'll bring you later at 3 p.m. I don't want us to get into that, but I just wanted us to highlight this survey that was done. And so hopefully, such surveys, as much as I know, in Africa, perhaps sometimes we don't pay too much attention to statistics. We don't pay too much attention to a lot of the things, but this will be a good opportunities perhaps for the government to look at and see, okay, fine, so these are areas that we're being told, and this is what, according to these surveys, what is happening. How can we do better in addressing these issues that have come up? How can we do better in addressing the issue of inflation, for instance? How can we do better in assuring these people that they're safe and there's no need for them to worry or be stressed or feel uncertain? These are things that now the government can use such a survey to see what to address and how to look at issues in a more wholesome way. Maybe, but I'm sure even Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed have other things to do. So this report, it could be the least of his worries anyway. So another report. Today I just have reports. Okay. So the annual report of the Munich Security Conference has found that global attitudes towards Russia and China have shifted since the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine, including Africa. The report says African countries' discontent with the West has not translated into a desire for Beijing or Moscow to wield greater influence over the international order. So what they're saying is, as much as Africa is not fully contented with its relationship with the West, but still that is not enough for them now to want to turn their attention fully to China and Russia as far as building and their cooperation with this country. So that this is the basis of this report. Now, a 176-page report released by the Munich Conference, an independent annual forum focused on international security, found that Africa is not interested in supporting a global order led by China and Russia. That's quite interesting. I wonder who they interviewed. Okay, let's also remember who carried out this report. Okay. It's Munich, there in Germany. According to the report, African countries' attitudes towards Russia and China are changing as a result of Moscow's invasion of its neighbor Ukraine. Interesting. Now, critics have accused African governments of failing to speak out against Russia's aggression and of refusing to economically and diplomatically isolate the nation. In a United Nations General Assembly vote in March 2022, 38 African countries condemned Russia's war on Ukraine, while 16 countries abstained. Now, the head of Security and Defense Analysis for the Center for Africa Security and Security Studies said that African countries' behavior in the international system confuses many people. I like the way sometimes we're just looked at as one homogeneous entity. Like when they look at Africa, it's like they're looking at Kenya. It's easy to predict Kenya's behavior or based on the past and the positions we've taken as a country in terms of issues of international relations or international importance, sometimes it's easy to predict what we will say or what the government will the action the government will take and all that, because that is Kenya for you. And Kenya will always make a decision, and every other country, in line with what it feels is best for it and in line with its foreign policy. It's a conversation I don't want to get into this morning. So is Egypt, so is South Africa, so is Nigeria, Algeria, Cameroon, Central African Republic, these other countries. And when you sit down and just interact with the different modes of issues and what is really happening and the interest that this country have and what seems to be priorities to the different governments, you realize we are so diverse in terms of our priorities. We are so diverse in terms of our cooperations with the different governments and institutions across the world. We are so diverse in how we even approach matters and how we do our things. We are not one homogeneous community, and that is what this international community, sometimes they fail to understand. So when someone comes up and say, the head of security and defense analysis for the Center for African Security and Security Studies, they're saying that African countries' behavior in the international system confuses many people. Why would they be confused? Because every country has its own agenda. Africa does not have one foreign policy. Africa does not have one interest. Our interest, that we don't have like a bowl where we all put our interest and we all decide, so this year African countries, so this is what we shall be pushing for, so this is what we shall be looking at, so this is how we shall be engaging as we engage with the international community. This is the outcome that we seek to have. No, that is what happens between individual countries in the continent. So the fact that people would think that because even African countries were divided on that vote in at the United Nations General Assembly, the vote in March, where 38 African countries condemned Russia's war in Ukraine. There are others who decided not to take a vote, and the others who voted against, I think. But majority of those who didn't vote to condemn absconded from voting. Why would that confuse them? Why would that confuse anybody? South Africa has its own, interest. South Africa is a member of BRICS, where Russia is also a member of that BRICS. India is a member of BRICS. Brazil is a member of BRICS. There are 5 countries, it is Brazil, we have Russia, we have India, we have China, and we have South Africa. And at this point, China and South Africa are on one side. China and Russia, as much as, but they are on one side from what we've been seeing at the trends and how we've been looking at how they're, and together in South Africa, that has also caused a lot of uproar. Okay, so I don't know how you expected South Africa to vote against Russia at that time. So South Africa, looking at its own interest and its own relationship with Russia, said, you know what, we are not going to participate in this vote. We choose to abscond, and that is within its right. And many other African countries that decided to take that route, and others who decided to vote against China, and those who not against China but vote against Russia's invasion, and those who voted in support of. Okay, so that shouldn't surprise anybody. That and Africa behavior, no, that is in fact a wrong term to use. So this person says there is confusion between internal interest and support. And internal interest differs. African countries are now focusing more on their own interest, as they should, rather than supporting China or Russia's geopolitical strategy, because that is not beneficial for us. That is not beneficial for us. We are not going to be caught up in this extension of a Cold War, supremacy battles, power influence, power struggles that we don't even have the might to even go there and stretch a muscle. That is not our war. We should be focused on our own interest and see if we are associating with China, for instance, how do we get to benefit from this relationship? If we are associating with the US or Russia, or whoever we choose to associate with, in a country or have a bilateral relationship, or even have maybe a bloc relationship, like say East African Community decides to have some sort of bilateral, not bilateral, but have some sort of treaties with say Russia or Japan or China, US, how do we stand to benefit as a bloc and as individual countries, right? So that we are not caught up. And I've seen the pressure that the Western countries have put on Africa, especially during that time and at the start of this invasion. Of course, this invasion, we condemn it with the strongest term, like there's no need. This war is so senseless. But also, if you've gone back to the history and how things operate up there, then you realize at some point that was going to be inevitable, okay? But because it's happening and it has happened, and as much as we condemn what is happening, it's not our war. It is not our conflict. That is not something that we should be caught up in and sit there and be at the center and core. So we should be left to make decisions that are best for our own countries. We have so much to worry about. Every country has to focus on its interests. This is what this person is saying. And he also continues to say that I think the difference here is that more African countries are becoming independent in the choices they make, for sure. And there's nothing wrong with that. So African countries' behavior should not be confusing anybody in the international community. While China and Russia may have garnered some support for their desired, according to this report, for their desired dominance in the global security and economic fields, most countries do not want a world led by autocrats, according to the researchers. That's something out there, right? Because I think a lot of our leaders here and their mentality and what they feel leadership is, I think it mirrors so much. It mirrors so much these governments. So according to this research, Africans would not want a world, right now, after World War II, the world became unipolar, where we had two powerful nations dominating the international system. And that was the United States and then the USSR, okay? Then immediately after World War, we had the Cold War. So these two superpowers engaged in a non-violent war that really changed the landscape of the international system. And then US and its allies worked so hard to destroy the USSR, and we saw it disintegrated. So right now, as it is, we have a unipolar system, which means the US is the superpower. And Russia has not been in agreement with that. China has been challenging that position. And that is what we are seeing, all this regrouping and all these strategies and all this coming together. It is to challenge the US in its position as a superpower, as a unipolar, because everything, and the reason why this is true, everything else, all your currencies, how do you check if your currency is strong or not? Against the US dollar, right? Against the US dollar. So that's what I mean by saying we have a unipolar system right now that China does not want to hear about, that Russia has always challenged because they were disposed from their position. So when you see this approach by President Vladimir Putin, I think he's sitting down and he's just perhaps dreaming of a day that he can consolidate back all the countries that were in the Soviet Union, so that Russia can go back to the place that it were during the Cold War, when it was also a dominant power. It still is a dominant power. It's still also considered a power to reckon with, but not in the way that the US is, and that has been something that Russia has been seeking to challenge. So African countries are saying, the reason why I'm explaining all that is they're saying they do not want a world led by autocrats. They don't want a world that the unipolar is an autocrat, or the superpower that is at the helm of the power struggle in the world is, say, China or Russia. Like I said, I don't know who they interviewed. but I find this to be quite interesting. And another specialist in China-Africa relations, his name is Paul Nantunya, he said China and the continent are collaborating, in this report, are collaborating to change some of the international institutions they feel are unfavorable to their survival. Of course, I've told you, international politics, international relations, international diplomacy is just about power struggles. The end of the day, that is at the core. Power struggle. The more powerful you are, as the realist would say, the better your chances of surviving in this international system that has no laws governing it. That's how realists, think. So you have to struggle to make sure your state stands out and you accumulate as much power as you can for you to be guaranteed a position in the international system. So that is why you see all these power struggles. And the Chinese government, according to this person, has been able to leverage African grievances with the current international system in order to build diplomatic and political affinity with the African countries. I think that China wants to do is selectively shape the current international system, like what I've been explaining to you, and China does not necessarily want to overthrow the international order, that is the unipolar, the superpower, that is the US. So this person is saying China does not want to upset that, but they also want to exert their dominance and their influence in the international system. And China wants to selectively shape different parts of the international system, and in that endeavor, China has found the support of African countries. It's quite interesting. So the core of this report is that Africa wants its voice heard and be given a role to play in shaping international laws. Okay. Well, I sort of tend to agree with a bit of that report, but also I would be interested to know who did they interview, the research, where was it carried, who were part of the sample group, and what happened. And I do share some sentiments with that, especially as far as the power struggles and the international system dominance and control is concerned. But now they're saying Africa, according to this report, Africa wants its voice heard and to be given a role. Why are we sitting to be given a role in shaping the international laws and rules? Who do you think is going to come here and say, okay, Africa, we've heard your cries, we've exploited you for a very long time, and now, us as European Union, we want to change our ways. Us as France, we want to do right by you. Us as the United States, we want to stop imposing our things so much on you and just support you into becoming. Who do you think is going to, why is Africa waiting to be given a role in shaping international laws and rules? We are waiting for the international system to come and give us that. When do you think that is going to happen? Never. I've said here and I repeat it. The international system has been set up in a way that the global south, which is where Africa belongs, get to stay as it is. The global south is a very important part as far as the international system is concerned. When it comes to raw materials, when it comes to everything that is required, especially in the global west, even the global east, you'll find that all of these things come from Africa. So if this global south people become smart enough, then the rest will suffer. So what makes you think they will empower you for you to now have a role to play in shaping international laws and rules? Africa, until you really wake up from this slumber and go on a journey and discover your place in the international system and your importance in this international system, that is the day we will truly be liberated. That is the day we will truly have our independence in this continent. We are very crucial in this food chain. We are very crucial in this international system. We just don't know it. We're very important. So we can't just be waiting for some things to be thrown our way. We must fight. because we're in this system together with the rest of these other sharks, and nobody's going to give us anything. You know, whatever we're given is just a carrot being dangled, so that we just stay within. We don't go too far, and we do not become friendly to maybe another four or another, you know, other powers. But we are left as they, and whatever they are giving here is not enough that we can say can change the landscape of this continent as far as its economy, as far as its true independence is concerned. So these are things that nobody will give us. These are offers that nobody will bring our way. We must stand to do right. We must stand and demand. We must find our voices. They will not give us our voices. Africa wants its voice heard. No, Africa must speak, and Africa must speak so loudly over what it wants. And if you do that enough times, then the world will listen. And you do that with seriousness, and you do that with leaders who have integrity, and you do that with leaders who respect the rule of law, and you do that with leadership that respects and honors the position that it has as far as serving its people is concerned. But we hardly have that in this continent, and that's why we are chaotic, and that's why the African Union is also chaotic, a body that is supposed to be representing us, because it is a collective, a representation of these countries that makes up the sum total of the African Union. So if you have chaos and corruption and all these things in the African countries, that is what is expected in the African Union. And the African Union Summit, Heads of State Summit, I think, is starting today. That is a conversation that Dr. Masanga shall be having with you at the top of the hour. And I think also, we shall be looking at some of the things that will be discussed there at the African Union. But for right now, there's a story, but I'll talk to you about it in the afternoon, God willing, about Nigeria and Nigerian authorities warning of being overwhelmed by bandit attacks. President Buhari was supposed to address the nation over the naira shortage. I think he put up a statement. I'm not sure, because Buhari also, just like Paul Biya, he does not like addressing people. But I think Paul Biya is notorious. No, Paul Biya is old and tired, so he's unable to. So that's it. He doesn't like to do that. So Buhari also does not like to do that, President Buhari of Nigeria. But he put up a statement. But for this and more, and the update of that statement, I think I'll bring us up here at 3 p.m. East African time with the latest news from across the continent of Africa. Thank you so much for your time this morning. It's about a minute to 11 a.m. here in Nairobi. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.